If you've always thought architecture was pretty cool, but you had a hard time understanding its history, this video is for you. I'm going to give you a simple framework that's going to help you instantly make sense of any architectural movement so it actually sticks. When people are trying to learn architectural history, a lot of them get hung up on the buildings. And you're like, well, duh, what am I supposed to be studying? But there's actually a lot more going on below the surface. There's 3 different things we need to understand to truly understand the story behind architecture. Let me introduce you to the Golden Circle. This framework comes from a TED Talk by Sinek, and he uses it to describe what makes leaders and organizations inspiring. He draws 3 concentric circles like a bullseye, and in the center he writes why, and then how, and finally what. He says every person, every organization knows what they do, and a few organizations actually know how they do it. Call it your process, your special technique, or your secret recipe. But very, very few organizations actually know why they do what they do, meaning what drives them, what's their motivation, what's their purpose. His point is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The people who really rally and follow behind a movement are drawn to its purpose, not its product. And that's true whether we're talking about businesses, social movements, or architectural movements. So we can use this same framework to understand any era or any movement of architecture, because it's not just about the particular buildings, that would be the what, but it's also about the how, the tools that they had, and the why, the motivation behind it. So to illustrate this example, let's start with modernism. So modernism started after the Industrial Revolution, and there was this energy and philosophy of the moment that was very much forward-looking. They were very much about progress. And they were also, by nature of coming out of the Industrial Revolution, they were in this era where we had finally harvested or harnessed electricity and machines. So there was this belief that like the progress of the industrial age and all these machines were going to help create a utopia. Like maybe we could solve all of the problems with good design and these new advancements in technology. So this idea of looking forward and progress was very important. They were also focused on breaking from the past and breaking from tradition. Rather than designing buildings for monarchs or traditional ornamentation, they believed in moving forward. And speaking of ornamentation, they viewed ornamentation as being dishonest. See, another key component to the modernist philosophy was actually around truth. They believed that ornamentation was sort of like a decoration, like a costume that you would wear, and it would hide the structure of the building, and it was like you were trying on a costume from another era. So they viewed ornamentation as almost being like a lie. They also believed in the truth and honesty in materials. For example, taking wood to paint it to look like marble would be dishonest. With their how, in the wake of the industrial age, we also obviously had machines and certain material developments that we didn't have before. For example, steel and concrete. So consider that there were no high-rises before modernism. We didn't have the structural capabilities at the time with the steel and the concrete, and even if we did, nobody would want to live on the top floor if we haven't invented elevators yet. So the why and the how actually make these new buildings possible. Like we couldn't have built the Seagram's building in the medieval time period. It would have been impossible. The reason why the Farnsworth House, the Seagram's building, and Villa Savoye are significant, and we talk about them as modernist buildings, is because they were made possible by the technological advances that they had at the time of modernism, and also driven by the underlying ethos, the underlying why that motivated the modernists in their own philosophy. There's lots of examples of modernist buildings, and these are just a few that do a great job at embodying all of these other aspects, the why, the how, and the what of modernism. The modernists believed in progress and science. They leveraged new technologies of the time, of steel, concrete, and the machine age, to make buildings like the Farnsworth House, the Seagram's building, and Villa Savoye. So the story of modernism isn't just about these buildings. These buildings are evidence of what the modernists believed and of the technologies that they had at the time. As Sinek points out, what we do is merely evidence of what we believe. So when the modernists made these modernist buildings, it's not like they were just trying to do something that looked a little different. The reason why they were trying to look different was integral to their philosophy about progress and moving forward and doing new things. So let's test this framework with another architectural movement, Gothic architecture. The fundamental understanding and conceptualization of life was that man had fallen from grace, and despite his sinfulness, was capable of being redeemed. And you can see this paradoxical optimism and severity in the Gothic cathedrals. Gothic cathedrals were built almost entirely out of masonry, and certain technological advances of the time allowed for these soaring structures, specifically flying buttresses, pointed arches, and rib vaults. These structural innovations also allowed for thinner structure and thereby bigger windows. And those large stained glass windows were used to depict and show stories from the Bible. And these grand buildings were built not just in a short period of time like today, they would be built over generations, some of them taking lifetimes to build. The Gothic cathedrals also implement fractals at like the tiniest detail of the tiniest little tracery might also be reflected in the design of the grand spire. This speaks to the belief that there's an underlying order in the world that permeates everything, a divine order. So the why of Gothic architecture was first and foremost a belief in God and the divine order, a belief that man was fallen and was capable of being redeemed. And the how was that they utilized certain technological and structural advances of the time, like pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses, to make the beautiful cathedrals of the Notre Dame de Paris, Cologne, and Chartres as just a few examples. So I picked these two movements because their contrasts are remarkable. Their why is almost opposite. The Modernists believed that utopia was in front of us, that through progress and development, these new technologies and the advent of the machine age, that we were going to be able to achieve utopia. But during the Gothic time period, they believed that utopia was behind us, that after the fall of man, after the Garden of Eden, paradise was lost. But despite that, despite the sinfulness of man, that he was still capable of being redeemed and that there might still be utopia in front of us and it was worth reaching for. And the how of any two movements is almost always about structural innovations and material developments at the time, but it's also a reflection of the economy and the workforce as well. For example, you look at the fact that Gothic cathedrals were often built by almost like a devotional effort over lifetimes, generations, whereas the Modernists were shorter time periods, right? It was all about efficiency and moving things fast, in addition to their own technological and structural advances that they had their access to. It's oftentimes structural innovations, but it's also a reflection of economics and labor. And the what of any particular movement is not just like a building, it's also an expression of what that civilization values. And that's true not only at like the scale of an individual building, but also at the scale of a city. The biggest building in a medieval city is the church, whereas the biggest buildings in the modernist city were office towers and factories, places of work. So you can use this golden circle framework to analyze any type of art, not just architecture. If you give a modernist a paintbrush instead of a drafting board, you're going to end up with an art piece, a painting that still represents the same why, the same ethos. But using different tools, a different how, any movement that's a true effective movement has integrity across all three of these. These are all derivative and integral of one another. As Simon Sinek said, what we do is merely evidence of what we believe. And some of the best evidence of what other civilizations believed is the architecture that we can still travel to and see in person today. So if you want me to use this framework to break down other movements of architecture, let me know in the comments down below. Simon Sinek's version of the Golden Circle has 3 rings: why, how, and what. But I think that if you use this circle as an integrated whole, in the middle there's something else, a who. If what we do is merely evidence of what we believe, then all of that together is evidence of who we are. And if you can better understand not just what another civilization built, but also their how and their why, you better understand who they were. And when you better understand who they were, that begs the question, who are we? If we use this framework to look at the world around us, not just the past, but also this moment, then it helps us better understand ourselves.